enlightened local who gave his life in service for the Cartagena community, as he followed the political legacy of his brother-in-law, President Rafael Núñez. He occupied the governor's stand for 3 consecutive periods, starting in 1980, bringing progress into the city by the building of the public market, the city's water supplies, the electric grid, the Arts Academy, the first public library, the reopening of the Dique Canal, parks, bridges, charity hospitals, and the practice of pediatrics by the formation given by his father, Manuel Romani Picon.
In another house from this street lived his last years the famous engineer Antonio Arevalo, designer of the military forts lying in the bay, who finally died April 9, 1800. These houses are recognized by their balconies full of pin-shaped fence barricades, all of them covered by tile roofs proper to the colonial age. Roman Street was in the colonial period called Calle de Nuestra Señora de la Valvanera, and afterwards Calle de Lozano.
As we get to the end of the Roman street, right on to the left, we find the Calle de la Cochera del Gobernador. It received this name because here, below the governor's palace, the governor's carriage used to be parked.
Up to the right, we find the Calle del Arzobispado, called this way since 1901, when the local bishop was upgraded. The last bishop and first archbishop was Monsignor Pedro Adam Brioski, successor of the bishop Eugenio Bifi. The street's former names were Nuestra Señora de la Consolación and Cementerio de la Iglesia, or Church's Graveyard. This last name came upon it because the land where the archbishop's palace rises was once destined to be a graveyard. The original land used to cover the whole block, in exception of the land where the cathedral now stands.
The houses, besides the archbishop's palace, in the Ayos and Santos de Piedra streets, were built after the year 1862. This because of the entering of the Decreto de Desamortización de Manos Muertas, a law statement that allowed the government to take control of all of the church's assets. In this street lived the Gutiérrez de Piñeres brothers Germán and Gabriel, Antonio José Ayos and Manuel de Anguiniano, all of them martyrs of the independence cause. In the hooded corners with the Roman Street lived the field general Antonio de Narváez y de la Torre, a strategic Creole leader in the independence matters.
We arrive to the Plaza de la Proclamación, where the governor's palace stands. Here, the governor's dispatch still works, as well as the state's administration. In this very square, the city's independence became official November 11, 1811. The people who had taken control of the city's arms stood in front of the palace, inspired by the French Revolution that had taken place in the 18th century. As they formed, they wrote and signed the Declaration of Independence, demanding it should be applied immediately. The building we see today is the sum of 3 houses bought by the administration. In those days, they were destined for the administration: the county jail, the courthouse, and the governor's manor.
In these houses, Sir Francis Drake stayed during the attack he led upon the city in 1586. The estates were remodeled in 1677 using the common models of Castilian city halls. They described a twin arch design facing the front, which gave them the aspect of a whole house as it's seen today. In the 19th century, a 3rd floor, fallen behind from the palace front, was added. At the end, the house that cornered with the Plaza de Bolívar was added, and 3 more arches were included in the governor's palace design. The square was named before Plaza de las Armas, or Square of the Arms, because of the local regiment who used the square as his resting military grounds.
other side of the square, we find the cathedral. On its lateral side stands a solar clock and the Puerta del Perdón or forgiveness door. The temple was built in the year 1579 by the artist Simón González, who left his mark in many of the important monuments of the time. This temple came to replace the antique wooden-made temple that was consumed in the 1552 fire, and its position was settled by Nicolás de Obando, carefully situating it as in Santo Domingo, beside the administration grounds and diagonal to the principal square. The temple was almost finished when Sir Francis Drake, during the 1586 attack, destroyed with cannons 3 of its base arches and the wooden structure from the top. After finishing the temple in the year 1600, the central and lateral vault collapsed, making the whole structure to be rebuilt and finally finished in 1612. In 1653, the crypt was built, followed by the main tower and the steeple in 1661. The structure, as well as all the city estates, started decaying towards the early 20th century days. The temple was recovered by Monsignor Biroschi, with the help of the Italian architect Espiritu Maria Chiappetta, who streamed a Fiorentinian design to the structure without taking away its original landscape. Simultaneously, French architect Gaston Lelage built the 50-meter-high main tower based on neoclassical trends.
The cathedral has a basilical-shaped base, with an inner vault illuminated by the open voice on top. The central vault is separated from the 3 lateral vaults by 3 arches held by strong columns made out of limestone drums. The marble pulpit, the monumental Via Crucis painted on the lateral vaults, and the wood structure from the 18th century, recovered in 2002, are worth to be seen and delightfully breathtaking. In 2001, the statues of the saints were brought back to the cathedral from the Archbishop's graveyard where they rested. 4 statues representing St. Peter, St. Paul, St. Gregory, and St. Sebastian were held in the upper side of the main tower, naming the street who passes right up front. In 2002, also came back to their spaces in the temple's front side 4 marble statues sculpted in Italy that represented St. Rosa de Lima, St. Catalina de Alejandría, St. Sebastian, and St. Luis Beltrán.
As we stroll out from the cathedral through its main door, we find ourselves in the Calle de los Santos de Piedra, or Street of the Stone-Made Saints, called this way by the locals, although the street's official name is the Pantaleón Germán Ribón, in memory of the independence activist. It was also called the Calle de Nuestra Señora de la Antigua, where the poet Juan de Cueto y Mena lived and opened the only pharmacy store that served in those times. It was, as he said, the most important and finest drugstore in the whole city.
We then strolled to the Plaza de Bolívar, the biggest, most important square in the city. In the early days, it lacked trees and landscaping, until it was recovered and turned into a district park in 1892. Its design followed the eclectic trend of the 19th century, and in that moment, a time capsule was buried containing medals and transcript from Rafael Núñez, a famous local who led the country as president on several occasions. Over this spot, 4 years later, the horse-mounted statue of Libertador Bolívar was installed. The relationship between the Libertador and Cartagena was very close. He was welcomed by the government of Manuel Rodríguez Torices in 1812, as he came back from his defeat by the Spaniards in Venezuela. Here, he wrote the document that went down in history as the liberty epic called the Manifiesto de Cartagena, considered as his political birth, proving him not only a soldier whose battles for independence were limited to Venezuela, but a visionary, universal leader whose country was all of America, for which he will dedicate the rest of his life to free. He left Cartagena with 200 men to begin the so-called Admiral Campaign, in which he reconquered Venezuela in only 3 months. Years later, the Libertador will pronounce his famous phrase, "If Venezuela gave me life, Cartagena gave me glory. Save Cartagena, the Redeemer." engraved in the pedestal of his statue. The park has 4 fountains that work by hydraulic system consisting of an elevated tank located in the orchard of the Inquisition Palace, and for which water was extracted from the undersoil by a windmill. The water got to the fountains by gravity.
The park, submitted to several recoveries, lost the outer fence that bordered it and was cut off from its original perimeter, being finally restored completely by the architect Phidias Álvarez in the year 2000. On the park's eastern side, we find the Museo de Oro, who stands in a colonial house restored by the Banco de la República under the management of architect Alberto Zamudio in 1982. The museum shows ceramics of golden pieces from the Zenú culture. The southern part of the square is delimited by buildings which front is covered by the portal of the Escribianos or writers' portal. The portal used to be the place where writers and calligraphers gathered in order to attend any writing task needed by the local people. Over this, we find the building of the Banco de la República, a Republican design of Belgian architect Joseph Martens, built in 1929. Reciting it, we find the Concurso Nacional de la Belleza House, where the National Beauty Pageant Administration remains.
At the western side of the square lies the Palacio de la Inquisición, which stands as the most significant example of local civil architecture of the 18th century. The so-called palace was, originally, the sum of 2 states that occupied the land where the Holy Witchery Office rented 3 houses as they came to perform their inquisitorial activities in the year 1610. These houses were brought by the Holy Office in 1630 and demolished in order to build a new structure to satisfy all of their office needs. In 1741, during the attack of the city commanded by Vernon, a bomb destroyed the building where the court and Yale House used to work. Because of the lack of funds, the structure was rebuilt in the year 1770, resulting in the building we see today, portraying a remarkable Baroque front made out of limestone.
The Inquisition was an institution that highly influenced the social, political, and religious local life, often source of several conflicts for the outrageous power and authority it was invested with. In its 207 years of existence, the Holy Office punished up to 767 people, 6 of these given to the government who condemned them to death by burning. The Inquisition building has been recovered several times. Its last recovery was made by the firm Civilco under the management of architect Alberto Zamudio. Inside this building, the visitor finds the Museum of Cartagena's history, divided in 2 rooms. One room for the historic photo gallery and the other where the historic archives remain.
The Plaza de Bolívar connects to the Calle de la Inquisición. On 10th Street, to the northern curb, stands the Casa de los Calabozos or House of the Dungeons, just beside the Inquisition Palace, another building owned by the Holy Office in those days. The following house, with iron balconies, was the home of Governor Juan de Torresar Díaz Pimienta during the years 1773 to the year 1781. During his government, he was viewed as a developer of progress in the province and was then named Viceroy of the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada, but he never had the chance to perform his duties because of his death, suffered after arriving shortly to Santa Fe. On the front curb stands the Casa de Escandia, one of the first houses restored in the city. This house belonged to the successful merchant Don Bartolomé Martínez Bocio, as well as the neighboring building where in 1907